And the second question is the following. You have got a generated regressor problem in your regression. Did you check a generated regressor problem in your regression, isn't it? Did you control for it?
No, that's why we did the instrumentation for FPC, for the fiscal policy countercyclicality. That's why we decided to use an instrument for it, to deal with that issue. That's my answer to your question. Yes? Yeah, yeah, no, you're right. In fact, I think in my life, I've been generous to one guy, Schumpeter. I think I've made Schumpeter say a lot of things that I think he didn't really say. People believe that Schumpeter had a model of growth, which he didn't have. People believe that all what I said about coefficient growth, because I always say Schumpeterian, and in fact, I attribute always to Schumpeter. I think I'm very generous to Schumpeter. Because you're absolutely right. No, but to be serious on your question, it's true that Schumpeter had this idea that downturns, you had a virtue of bad times. But that's true when you don't have credit constraint. So I've done a study on using French data because I could have firm level measure of credit constraint in France. And how we could a firm level measure of credit constraint, when you go on my website, you find the paper, is because when a firm doesn't pay its trade creditors in France, it's put on the blacklist, banks access the blacklist, and they don't lend to that firm. So you can have firm level measure of credit constraint. And we could show that the less credit constrained a firm was, the more counter-cyclical R&D is, exactly for the reason you say, because it's an opportunity cost effect. In bad times, that's the time where you renew, where you reorganize, where you do things other than just producing, because the opportunity cost of doing this is lower in recessions. But unfortunately, the tighter the credit constraint, the more pro-cyclical R&D becomes. You see what I mean? Because unfortunately, these investments like R&D are costly, and the extent to which you can make them is constrained in a recession because you can only borrow and invest up to a multiple of your cash flow. So we could show that the more credit constrained you were, so when you are not credit constrained, you are in the Schumpeter case. And when you are credit constrained, you are not. And now you say, what do you call Schumpeterian? Schumpeterian is because the idea that innovation drives growth. You believe, that's Schumpeter's idea. You see, innovation drives growth. So that's what I call it Schumpeterian. But you're absolutely right. In the exact sense of the term, Schumpeter had in mind the case where you have no credit constraint and where you have counter-cyclical things. Yeah. No, but the thing is that it depends on the credit constraint. If you are in an economy where firms are not credit constrained, you don't need these policies because the cycle does it for you. Do you see what I mean? Whereas when you are in an economy where firms are very credit constrained and you don't correct for the cycle, you discourage this kind of investment. So the optimal amount you would do would depend on the extent to which the economy is credit constrained or not. You would look at these kind of parameters, at these interactors. More generally, I think there is a big idea in growth economics and that the interaction between fast-moving and slow-moving. A policy is a fast-moving thing. An institution is a slow-moving thing. Culture is even slower moving. And a lot of action comes from the interaction between the fast-moving and the slow-moving. Credit constraint is not something you can change overnight. But policy, cyclicality of policy is something that you can change faster, I think. Yeah.
Actually, emerging markets did pretty well in counter-cyclical fiscal in the last crisis. Actually, did better probably than advanced countries, and that's maybe one of the many reasons why they did better coming out of the crisis than advanced countries. Now, the problem seems to be that they were good at counter-cyclical fiscal in the downturn. They don't seem to be as effective in doing counter-cyclical fiscal in the upturn. And we're already seeing some problems, say, in Brazil, for instance, and other countries where now you have a big upturn, actually you have probably a boom or overheating economy, and they're not doing as much in terms of counter-cyclical fiscal. So, again, maybe it goes back to your question about democracies. And
that's more like an analysis Tabellini story.
Yeah, it's very easy to do a counter-cyclical boost in a downturn. It's not so easy to do a counter-fiscal tightening in an upturn, and that is exactly what we're witnessing now in many emerging markets.
Because there is not the problem that, Joseph was raising before, the problem that, they may be too poor to do it. But the Brazil problem is not that they are too poor. It's more kind of a Lesina, Tabellini type of, I would say, well, I don't think it's a problem that they are too poor. Is that they have other reasons. Right? There are other things, I think. It's not just the fact that, I would not have given Brazil as an example of, for example, I would give other countries possibly as an example of what you had in mind. Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, so, okay. Something else.
You estimated the counter-cyclicality of the policy based on output gap and deficit, as far as I remember, right? So these are basically Keynesian measures. So how different is that?
Well, no, the channel is not the same. In the Keynesian world of the multiplier, you are not looking. Here, I'm looking at growth-enhancing investment by firms and the fact that they cannot continue these investment if they think they have to discontinue them when they have a recession. You see what I mean? So it's very much a supply-side story. Now, it can be that, market size, maintaining the market size of a firm, for example, public investment or public demand for innovative products can help firms maintain their R&D investment over the cycle. So I'm not saying that demand factors would not, but they would come through a supply, they would be mediated through a supply side effect. You see what I mean? So it's not the same, whereas the multiplier, the usual Keynesian multiplier is just the idea, I give wages, people go and spend their wage, and that's what shows and they look at the short-run effect of that. You see what I mean? Whereas mine is much more looking at, I want to make sure that growth-enhancing investment are being maintained. Those are the guys I want to maintain. So I could maintain that by just subsidizing those investments. You see what I mean? I don't need to just pay higher wage for that. Now, it could be that to other extent, sometime also guaranteeing the market access, the market outlets of innovating firms would be a way to deal. But it's much more selective. You see what I mean? And it's more selective, more targeted, and more long-term. I look at the growth effects. And it's mediated through the impact it has on R&D and innovation investment, whereas none of this is in the Keynesian story. You see what I mean? So mine is not totally divorced from. You could imagine you could reintroduce some Keynesian effects in mine, but it would be mediated through supply side and R&D investment. So it's by nature a very different story. And I think it's also a different way of doing macro policy. You see, you don't recommend, give wage and increase spending everywhere. That's not the recommendation I would give. But I would not recommend either to do like Cameron does, to cut everywhere, including in education. I would not, you see, I'm really middle ground. I'm the third way.
Okay, one more last question, okay? If you try to put a dummy on sticky price countries, you control the friction, because the initial world is a world with frictions.
But I have a country dummy, so that would absorb, I think. Yeah, I have a country fixed effect, so that it would absorb it, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
On that moment, I want to thank again Comunicazion and everybody else. Invite you all for lunch. And the lunch is here.
Here. Oh, good. Fantastic. Well, you were way too generous with me. Huh? I mean, oh yes. You intimidated me. I blushed.
You know,
Ah.